Hello, America. We're back on Radio Free Market with Dr. Walter Block, and I wanted to lead in the segment with this question that we addressed at the end of the last segment. What is the kind of the psychological effect on young workers who are maybe want to make some summer money, for example, selling lemonade, and they're unable to because of licensing laws?
Well, obviously it can't be very good. We're trying to socialize young people, children, into lives of productive work, and if we tell them at the get-go, right at the outset, that no, you can't do a lemonade stand, they'll go back to watching TV or something else. I don't know, maybe take piano lessons, which isn't so bad, but all facilities of children should be developed, not just piano lessons and swimming or whatever in the summer, but if they want to be, entrepreneurial and they want to sell lemonade or they want to deliver newspapers or whatever, we have all sorts of child labor laws. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't set up a lemonade stand. There are actually cases on record where parents got arrested for allowing their children to sell lemonade. And what's the poor little kitty to make of it? I mean, little Susie gets the jackboot, maybe not literally, although maybe sometimes, and she's told that, you can't do this is illicit, and she says, well, maybe there's something wrong with commerce. And that's what they teach in a lot of business schools, too. I happen to be in a business school. And you go to medical school, at least if you're admitted, they say medicine is good. And you go to law school, and they say law is great. You go to business schools, and sometimes they're apologetic about business. You want to make a profit, but not too much. So I guess it starts with young children. Young children are, in effect, told you can't work. And then also the minimum wage law, with lemonade stands, they're told they can't set up their own businesses. Minimum wage law makes it impossible for them to work for someone else. So you have hordes of kids who are a little bit bored because there's only so much swimming you can do and so much bicycle riding in the summer, and they want to work and make some money and maybe buy presents or buy a computer or whatever, and the minimum wage law prevents that as well.
Mm-hmm. I could speak directly to that about business schools. Not really demonizing people who make too much money, but certainly there's a bias towards praising CEOs, for example, who will take a pay cut or who will take a lower salary, which is honorable, absolutely, but you can definitely see the bias at a modern business school. So I have a family friend, and I won't name him, but and his view is, he's a Paul Krugman fanatic, by the way. He says if it weren't for the government, we'd all be eating radioactive waste, breathing asbestos, and drinking paint in our milk. How would you respond to this view? Because I was so stunned by that, I couldn't even respond. I was speechless.
Well, I think it's to the extent that we still have these problems, it's because of the government. It's not because of free enterprise. Because, again, what you want when you have a certification activity, the certification function, what you want is a system where if you're a good certifier, you can prosper and expand your base of operation. And if you're a bad certifier, you lose customers, people don't patronize you, people don't trust you, and eventually you have to go broke. And that's why we have reasonably good rubber bands and paper clips and pens and shoes and ties and shoelaces and pizza, because if you don't produce these things well, you lose money, and if you don't produce them well for a long enough time, you go broke, and the ones who remain are the ones who are doing a pretty good job. So we don't have a banana crisis or a burger crisis or anything like that because of the profit and loss system of free enterprise. But this works as well for certification. If you do a good job as a certifier, like I don't know, kosher foods or good housekeeping seals of approval or things like that, well, then people trust you. And if you do a bad job, you go broke and you're out of it. Whereas when you have the government, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and if they do a good job, they don't get more money. And if they do a bad job, they don't get less money. If they do a bad job, probably they get more money because they need more money. I don't know. Take the post office. When the post office does a better off with a privatized post office industry where they can compete with each other or with one monopoly post office. Well, this insight that applies to postal delivery and to raisins and shoelaces also applies to certification. What we want is an industry where if you do a bad job, you go broke. I'm in New Orleans. We had Katrina, and because of FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, 1,800 people were killed in New Orleans. Are FEMA still in business? Yes. Is the Army Corps of Engineers still in business? Yes. Suppose 1,800 people died in Disney World. Would Disney World be in business anymore? Of course not.
Absolutely. So, our listeners, I hope you're starting to see that these government laws that, whether they are well-intentioned or not, they hurt usually the poorest of the poor, the people who are least capable. So, I want to relate that to taxes. How do tax increases affect business people, and especially the smaller ones?
Well, right now, the reason business isn't hiring is because of something that Robert Higgs calls regime uncertainty. Namely, they're sort of like deer caught in the headlights. They're frozen. They don't know what to do. Obama keeps changing the rules, keeps changing everything, and people are afraid to hire. So you get that sort of a phenomenon. When taxes go up or they keep changing, business are less able than otherwise to hire people, to allow jobs to be created. When the government taxes more money gets circulated through the so-called public sector, namely the socialist sector, and less through the private sector. Our unemployment rate isn't as bad as it would be, except for the fact that the government is hiring a lot of people to work for the government. And the way they can do that is to raise taxes so they can pay the salaries of the workers. I don't know. I go around the streets of New Orleans and I see these people that are cleaning the streets or fixing the streets, and there are 50 of them, and 49 of them are standing around looking, just holding their shovels, and one of them is digging. If you had private enterprise, that kind of a company would go broke. So the point is, we can create all the jobs we want, and they created a lot of jobs in Russia under the Soviet system, where everything was funneled through the government sector. You could have a lot of jobs, but then you had hidden unemployment, where the workers were, some workers were creating hammers, but nobody was creating nails, and vice versa, and the Soviet system went belly up. So the more taxes we have, the more government enterprise we have, and the less private enterprise, the more toward the Soviet system of communism we go, the worse we're going to be.
What if we didn't have taxes? How would the world survive? Like, aren't there just some things that are so big that only the government can do, like building freeways or ports or the Panama Canal?
Well, one of my recent books is on why we should privatize highways, so it's apropos here. I don't think there's anything that private enterprise can't do. Let me just say this before I get into that. There are two types of libertarians. One is anarchist libertarians, or anarcho-capitalists, and the other is minimal government libertarians, or minarchists. And the anarchists say that everything can be done by private enterprise, and the government need not do anything. Whereas the minarchists say, well, there are certain things that only the government can do, and the main role that they assign to the government is the protection of persons and property rights. And to that end, you need three institutions, according to the Randians, who would be minarchists, an example. One, you need armies to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not, Ron Paul would say, to go out and have 100 or 1,000 military bases in 200 different countries. Second, police to keep local bad guys off of us, not to uphold drug laws and victimless crime laws, which put people in jail unnecessarily, but to stop murders and rapes and theft. And three, courts to decide who the good guys and the bad guys are. But whether you're a minarchist libertarian or an anarchist libertarian, no one would say in that field or in that philosophy would say, well, there are certain things that are too big that only government can do, because that's why God invented the stock market. If there's something really big that I want to go to the moon or I want to go to Mars, and if people think that this is going to be a paying proposition, and that would be a real big expenditure, what I do is I float a bond issue or a stock issue on Wall Street, and I say, hey, I got a company, we're going to go to the moon and get green cheese, and we're going to sell it or something like that, and I'll give you a share if you give me $100, and I'll sell 10 million shares, and I'll have $1 billion, and I'll go off and I'll start doing it. So, where does government get the money from in the first place to make a Panama Canal or to make roads or to make bridges or to make moonshots or whatever? It gets it through taxes. Mm-hmm. Namely, millions of people pay it. Well, millions of people could pay it if they thought it was a good idea through the stock market.
So the government's just big enough to waste that large enough of money.
Oh, the government and waste is, waste is government's middle name. And again, the reason for that is that they don't have this market weeding out system which rewards profitable non-waste and penalizes waste.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I really recommend that everyone pick up a copy of Defending the Undefendable, because it has so many topics that you would just never think should be legal or could be legal or could work, but they do in just this voluntary framework that libertarians talk about. So last interview we were only able really briefly to touch upon one of my favorite topics, which is the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and the money creation. I'm sure many of our listeners have heard somewhere or the other that the government prints money, quote, out of thin air. So first, Walter, does the Federal Reserve actually print money out of thin air?
Well, they do a little bit nowadays. Most of it is now just banking deposits, entries into banking statements. But yes, the government creates money, whether it's cash, which would be printing it, or through the banking system. Yes, the government creates money through thin air. They can create as much money as they want. Our man Bernanke, Benny the paper hanger Bernanke, is having quantitative easing 1 and quantitative easing 2, and who knows, quantitative easing 3. These are just words for creating more money. Now, this is a horrible thing in two ways. One, when the government creates more money, we have inflation. And one of the reasons that we had World War II and the rise of Hitler is because we had the German hyperinflation in 1923, which just undermined the German society, and Hitler came in as partially as a result of that. Zimbabwe now, you can be a zillionaire. A loaf of bread costs $3 trillion. We're happily not at that point. We don't have hyperinflation. We don't even have inflation now. Much of it, but he's been creating a lot of money, Bernanke, and the banks haven't been lending it out, but and soon I expect the banks to start lending it out, and when they do, with the multiplier, with the fractional reserve system that we have, if the fractional reserve is 10%, which it roughly is, they'll create 10 times as much money as the money that the Fed creates. And this brings me to another point about unemployment, which is the main subject of the hour. What the Fed does when it creates money, it does two things. One, it increases prices, and that's inflation. But it does something, and sort of a lot of people know about this, although not everyone knows about it. Some people blame corporate greed for inflation, but most, at least economists or sophisticated people in economics, know that the government creates money, and that feeds inflation. We have the quantity theory of money. But there's a much more insidious thing that also happens when the Fed creates money, and that is that it lowers interest rates artificially lower than they otherwise would have been. And what this does is it leads to production or investment in areas that never would have been invested in if the interest rate hadn't been artificially lowered. I don't know how much time we've got more in this segment. It's sort of a complicated issue, so I'll start now on this, and if I don't have time, maybe I can continue in the next segment.
We have about 4 minutes, so what Dr. Block is about to explain is the Austrian theory of the business cycle.
Absolutely.
And also we have a couple of shows upcoming where we're going to talk about Keynesian versus Austrian ideas of why this happens. So what you're about to hear is very important, and it's called the Austrian theory of the business cycle. So go ahead, Dr. Block. You have about 3 minutes.
Oh, well, it's a tough road to hoe, but I'll make a start.
We have faith in you.
Let me approach this circuitously. I'm a professor. I'm never supposed to say anything directly. Right now, the allocation of resources between rubber bands and raisins is okay. In other words, there's no crisis. No one is saying we have way too many raisins and way too few rubber bands. But suppose the government started subsidizing raisins and started taxing rubber bands, such that we had many, many more raisins than we would otherwise want and many fewer rubber bands than we would otherwise want. And they kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And then what happened is that a lot of people left their jobs in rubber bands and started employment in raisins. And then all of a sudden they had to stop. And now we would see that there are investments in raisins that were silly to have made. We're up to our armpits in raisins. We don't need all those raisins. And there's vast unemployment in the raisin industry, and there's vast underemployment in the rubber band industry. Well, what we need now is to not prop up the raisin industry anymore. It's been propped up too much. Rather, we need to get people out of raisins and into rubber bands, and that's going to take a while because, people just don't go instantaneously from a job that they shouldn't be in to a job they should be in. Okay, well, now let's get, with that introduction, let's get into Austrian business cycle theory. What the lowering of the interest rate does, it does not subsidize raisins, but it subsidizes something else. Namely, it subsidizes heavy industry. The Austrians believe in this thing called the structure of production. Capital is not a homogeneous good. There are various kinds of capital. There's some capital that's heavy industry, and they create stuff that is years and years away from consumption, like mining or heavy manufacturing or houses or cars or things like that. It takes a long time to make those things. On the other hand, what a lower interest rate does is it takes investments away from industries that are shorter run, that are closer to consumption, say retailing and wholesaling. So what we have is way too many people in cars and houses and mines and factories, and way too few people in retailing. And that's what the reason for that is according to the Austrian business cycle theory of Hayek and Mises and Rothbard. The reason for that is that the government artificially lowered the interest rate, and this served as a subsidy or a inducement or an incitement on the part of entrepreneurs to invest in roundabout methods of production, Bomberwerk, another Austrian would say, and not enough investments in these other areas. So I think the analogy between raisins and rubber bands is an apt one, and the reason I mention raisins and rubber bands is that it's easier for people to wrap their minds around it, whereas it's harder for them to see long-run goods and short-run goods. But the reason we have a housing bubble is because houses are a long-term investment. Am I running out of time?
We have about 20 seconds left. Yeah, I'm going to take it from here. We're coming near the end of this segment, folks, so we're going to be back here with Dr. Walter Block talking about job creation. We'll come back. We will talk a little more about the Federal Reserve and the business cycle. So stay with us. We'll be back on RadioFreeMarket.com.
Welcome back to Radio Free Market. We're here with Dr. Walter Block. Dr. Block was just telling us about the business cycle theory, the Austrian business cycle theory, and why so many people built and bought houses in this last housing bubble. Dr. Block?
Yes. I think I would like to mention several books that people could follow up on. Perhaps the best introduction to this is a thing by Murray Rothbard, which is called Depressions, Their Cause and Cure. All of this stuff is available for free, I think, on the Mises web. Certainly that one is. There's a book by Robert Murphy, who is an excellent critic of Krugman on business cycle theory, and he's got a book on the Great Depression. Another one is Murray Rothbard's book called The Great Depression. And then there's one by Tom Woods, a book called Meltdown. I forget, it's a longer title. It's got a subtitle, but Meltdown is the key element there. So if people would get a hold of those four books, they would have a very good introduction into this. I've only barely scratched the surface of it. Another contributor to this is Roger Garrison, and then, of course, there's Hayek, but now we're getting into more technical stuff that maybe people who are studying this seriously would get involved in.
Okay, so the answer to all of these issues that all these things that we've talked about that cause unemployment, licensing, and taxes, the answer to all of these seems to be the free market. In your opinion, does the free market mean utopia? Is that what we're trying to tell people?
Well, I agree. Free enterprise is the cure for what ails you, but free enterprise will not bring about a utopia. The only thing that will do that is manna and heaven and the Garden of Eden and stuff like that, which is very unrealistic. No, the free enterprise system will just enable human beings, imperfect human beings, to do the best they can given their limitations of intelligence, of initiative, of entrepreneurial ability. the free enterprise system will just enable human beings to do the best they can. Whereas when you substitute the government for the free enterprise system, then human capacities decrease and we create poverty. So the free enterprise system is not a utopia. If we had free enterprise, we're not going to cure all disease and there'd still be some poverty, but less disease and less poverty and more wealth and more human cooperation.
Mm-hmm. So, we talked about the business cycles. In a free market, there will most likely be business fluctuations and periods of relatively higher unemployment. But, in our opinion, the free market at least minimizes the scope of damage that would be done to the economy during a business cycle type event. Could you comment on that?
Well, Murray Rothbard, in his book, Depression, Cause and Cure, which is a mini book, a very small book, goes into this and says, look, if hula hoops come into effect or hula hoops are suddenly popular, there'll be unemployment because people are going to have to be drawn away from other tasks and put into hula hoop factories, and there'll be transitional unemployment as you get them from one place to another. And then when the hula hoop phase goes out, and entrepreneurs are left with unsold hula hoops, well, now all the people in the hula hoop factories are going to have to go do other things that people now want, like, I don't know what, umbrellas, paper clips, who knows. So people keep changing their minds, styles change. Do you know how the automobile industry devastated the horse and buggy industry? I mean, it just created vast unemployment among whip makers and horse breakers and people like that. And the computer industry created vast unemployment in the typewriter industry. You people are probably too young to know what a typewriter is, but a typewriter is sort of like a computer without a computer. It's got a keyboard and you type directly onto paper. Well, this sort of unemployment is not generalized unemployment, Murray Rothbard would say. It's just the fact that inventions occur or tastes change, and you'll get some unemployment, transitional unemployment, as people are led by Adam Smith's invisible hand out of typewriters and into computers or out of horses.
Walter, I hate to interrupt you because that's such a great point, but that is the end of our show today. So just want to leave our listeners and thank you to Walter Block for being with us today. This is Aaron Brown and Zoe Russell with Radio Free Market. Please visit us on the web at radiofreemarket.com, where you can subscribe for free to all of our shows and our archives for easy downloads. Until next week, wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. Thank you for listening.